I think I heard it described once, and I'm not sure who said this, but you make art because when the pain of not making exceeds the pain of making, and I think there's something in that.
Welcome to the Final Fruit Bowl, a platform dedicated to the exploration of art and the creative process. This episode is the second part of my conversation with Mark Thompson. Please go back to the last episode for the first part. Mark is an oil painter who creates stunning landscapes and interiors that are both factual and fiction, and his work deals with the considerations of memory and truth. As well as painting, Mark is also a photographer using analog methods to explore the passing of time. I thoroughly enjoyed my talk with Mark Thompson, and I really hope you enjoyed it too. So it ended on, at what point does an artist's reputational brand become more important than the work they create?
Mm-hmm. I think I'm going to pretty much repeat myself. My biggest issue is with the idea of branding. As an artist, it becomes almost like a kind of cult of personality, so that the name of the artist, the idea of the artist becomes a bit like a facade. You lose the personality, and the work, to a certain extent, becomes much less interesting than the idea around the person. It's a bit like and I mean no disrespect to him, it's like the Banksy phenomena. His name is far more interesting than the work, arguably. And I don't know, but I think also, and this is the same for all artists, I should imagine, the difference between fame and regard. What are we really going for? Do we want our work to be well regarded? Do we want it to be seen and in the broader sense useful? Or do we want our own face and self to be famous, in the modern sense? And I certainly know which one I'm going to go for.
I was about to say, do you think art should be useful, though?
How do you mean, sorry?
So, can you create art just for commercial success?
I should imagine you probably can. I suspect that a great deal of that work would be somewhat vacuous, because you'd have to produce so much of it to spread far and wide. To be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure that's what. I mean, I can't speak about any other kind of art really than painting, but I'm just not sure that's what painting's for.
Yeah, that's a fair answer.
It's by definition slow.
Of course, yeah, because it takes time to create it.
Yeah, and I mean, is there any higher inherent value if a painting is done in a day or done in a month? Probably not. But
that's true.
I'm just in terms of the sheer marketing of it. How can, say for the sake of argument, you make 10 to 12 or 15 paintings a year? That simply isn't enough for the machinery of fame to grind you out into something usable.
Yeah, of course, yeah, because you need to, be constantly in everybody's thoughts all the time, or at the forefront of people's view all the time. And I think, that's a good point, because I think, when you see artists who have quote unquote evergreen content where they can just be like, oh, this is what I did 3 years ago, that's cool, but to a certain point you're going to have seen it all, and people want to see more, want to see what you're doing next.
Well, I think also, in order to gain that kind of fame rather than regard, one would have to be in the hands of an ad agency, and
that's true.
And a publicist, and otherwise it would be a full-time job making yourself famous for doing something you no longer have the time to do.
That's true. That's very true. And also, and it will take away from your, obviously, creation of the art.
Yeah.
Which, kind of defeats the whole purpose of being an artist, I guess.
Pretty much.
But hey, I think, I don't know, I just think the tie between art and commerce and art and commodity are extremely interesting. It's just something that's on my mind a lot recently.
I think it's hard for it not to be. I very, very recently, and probably I'm late to the party on this one, heard about this contemporary phenomena of NFTs. And it sounds an awful lot like attempting to sell air. You know, I mean, I could be wrong, but it seems somewhat anti-art. I can't help thinking that, and I may have used this phrase before, it's you know, contemporary society and the contemporary art world particularly has made a kind of compromise with commerce, and where objects are traded as physical commodities rather than as artworks. You know, that they become the same as stocks. And
very much so.
They become part of a portfolio, which is something that is relatively recent. It's a little bit like, you know, those strange sand pictures that were trapped between two sheets of glass, and you tilted it one way and all the sand would run in a pattern to one side. That's kind of what's happened with the art world and money. The financial industry sort of yanked one side of the sand picture down, and all the sand went up to one end, and with very little on the other. So what's happened is, or certainly seems to be, that in the thin end of the market, you know, the lower priced end, still has there's a following, and there's a lot of potential as a young artist to market yourself through online galleries and sort of sell it yourself kind of platforms. And then at the other end of the market, you've got, you know, sort of massive money moving around, you know, with the phenomena of people bidding their own collections up higher. But the whole of the middle ground has sort of been carved out. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know, I was at an art fair a few years ago and talking to a gallery owner from a gallery that I'd always been interested in showing in London and never quite got to really speak to. And I was talking to her about another artist's work at the fair, and somebody came up to her and said, "Oh, you know, I'm an artist, and can I possibly show you my work?" And she said, "Well, firstly, this really isn't the place to do it. But secondly, honestly, we're letting artists go rather than taking new ones on. You know, we've got a smaller premises now than we've ever had, because, you know, the overheads are bigger, and people are far more cautious."
Yeah, well, that's actually a really good consideration, because I think there's a big, it's probably not a misconception. That's good. It's probably a big misconception that to be quote unquote successful is, you know, you have to get into a gallery, and, you know, if your work is good enough, a gallery will just welcome you with open arms. When actually, you're right, they've got overheads, they've got space to consider, they're paying rent for that space. You have to make sure that they're taking, you know, the right precautions and, you know, your work will sell. So that's a good point. There is like a very big level of business underneath it that you don't really see or you don't really hear much about.
Well, and there's a very good reason for that. I think we're living in this kind of tech era, where the means of creative application, you know, has been put in everybody's hands. Anybody that owns an iPhone or whatever, has Procreate and GarageBand and Final Cut Pro, and, you know, everything that you can make a feasible product, for want of a better word, and I use that with a certain degree of caution. And, you know, there's the idea that anybody can be an artist, anybody can create something, and, you know, if you just put your heart and soul into it, you too can be successful. It's a kind of demystification or democratization of art, and I'm not entirely sure that's healthy. You know, it's I think when a practice or a process that we've been engaged in for, I think they carbon dated the earliest cave painting. It was something like 120,000 years old. Wow. You know, if we've been doing this practice for that long, there is something inherently human and something quite special about it. Turning it into something that is throwaway and deletable, I'm not sure that can be a good thing.
And do you think that anyone can be an artist, and or is there a difference between somebody who creates images or somebody who makes images?
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, the last part of the question is in some ways semantics. It depends on the terminology we wish to use. Could you give me the first part of the question again?
Yeah, can anybody be an artist?
I think there's a big difference between a skill set and its application creatively. I mean, arguably, anyone can be taught a skill, and does that set of skills inherently make somebody an artist? Say that they're taught to draw, and they have a grasp of color theory. Does that make them a painter? I mean, yeah, it's a bit like saying, is literature Dostoevsky, or is it the phone book? Both are made of words.
Very good analogy.
Theoretically, are both literature to a certain extent. I think I'm hesitant to use the term hierarchy, but there has to be a difference between. I'm gonna get myself into terrible trouble here, but there has to be a difference between Bob Ross and Vermeer, or there has to be a difference between. Not everything's the same.
Yeah, of course.
Otherwise there'd be no such thing as criticism.
That's true.
The gallery world would, or the museum, the idea of a museum, that notionally museum comes, it means the home of the muses. There's a reason why we have institutions that maintain and hold objects and ideas that we hold to be the most important things that humanity creates. There's a difference between, and yes, of course, it's a question of taste, and it's a sliding scale, but there is a difference between. I'm going to have to use the literature analogy again. That there is a difference between, the manual for your washing machine, or a Mills and Boon, or a Hello magazine, and Jonathan Franzen, for want of a better author. There is a difference. We know there's a difference. I mean, we're very queasy to say where to draw the line. And I think one of the biggest problems in contemporary art, or certainly within painting, is where we allow ourselves to draw the line.
Yeah.
And again, it's impossible not to come back to this idea of the fashion for de-skilling. The moment that came in, we kind of hobbled ourselves in being able to then discern what we considered worthy of attention.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. And I think, attention is the right way to put it, because everybody has their own kind of audience and their own kind of intent in why they create work. And I think that plays a large part into how much kind of emphasis people put on it for it to be true art or not. And I think that's a good point. I actually once read a book that I'm actually going to send you as a suggestion. It's called The Cult of the Amateur.
Okay.
And it was talking about how people being amateurs are killing industries, because people always think they can do something. Yeah, actually, it's hurting the industry more than it's helping. Because, say photography, for instance, which is a perfect example, all the people doing free work and free photo shoots is killing the business for photographers who are trying to make a living. And it's great. And it's great that people want to obviously be photographers and do photography and explore that medium, but there is other repercussions further along the line that they're not thinking about. And it was just a really interesting book.
I think it's if one isn't careful, one can stray into this kind of slightly po-faced idea of us awfully experienced and proficient, in this case, artists at the top of the stylistic tree become arbiters of taste for everybody else, and everybody else is somehow inferior. That's one end of the argument. The other end is this the thing that we're talking about, where everybody's an artist, and it's all fun and throwaway until we find the next thing we're interested in. That's at the other end of the spectrum. And inevitably the answer lies somewhere in the middle. But I suspect that you know how in recent times we've sort of populist politics has a tendency to disdain expertise, and it seems that life has finally caught up and is suddenly imitating art.
Yes.
If we denigrate the expert who holds any of the answers, or at least who holds the key to the questions.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
You're
right. I guess you're right. Like, if you level out the playing field of art and say everybody's an artist, then you're right. Like, who is? Yeah, then it becomes kind of this convoluted mess of just content. And I think that's in a way why content creators, quote unquote content creators, have and influencers have such a standing in the way they do now, because I think that they're held in a certain regard and everybody else is below that. Or it's like, because the way I see it, particularly like content creators and stuff, I feel like everybody's content creator first and foremost. If they're putting images online, there shouldn't be any special category for that. And secondly, I feel like the whole idea of influencers are like, it just seems a bit, maybe I'm just like old before my time, but it doesn't make any sense to me. Like, why are we putting people on a pedestal? I just don't understand that. Particularly people who don't necessarily have any particular expertise or any particular knowledge, whereas in somebody like an artist who has that knowledge and has that experience of being an artist for decades, for instance, why would we not want to listen to them? Why do we listen to the the next hot thing that just happens to be trending?
Well, I think that there are two things that instantly sort of leap to mind, and one is and we may have touched on this already. The thin spreading of the term artist has made an artist of everybody. If generated pop bands are called artists, and Rembrandt is called an artist, there's a disconnect there. I think also we love drama. We love the excitement of the next big thing, and we love to overreact and get all bent out of shape and bothered by things. And content creation, it feeds that bubble. It's like this is extremely exciting, it's very new, so therefore it pushes all the buttons in my brain. And I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I don't know the terms, and I certainly don't know. I certainly can't talk on this with any great expertise or authority. But I'm reminded again of the. I think I may have said this in the first part of the interview, that this wonderful cartoon of the top half of it shows Leonardo da Vinci holding up the Mona Lisa, saying, "It's taken me 15 years to create, and I'm delighted." And then the box underneath is somebody saying, "Oh my God, I haven't posted a new work of art in 3 days. People must think I've died."
Absolutely. I think that says a lot about society, and I think particularly for something like art, for instance, which could be considered by some people, not everybody, but by some people could be considered frivolous or unnecessary. And I think that's a really good point in terms of the existence of the artist, particularly online.
But the question is, why and how has the artist become synonymous with frivolity or meaninglessness? We've done this to ourselves. I think as artists, we've allowed ourselves to be seduced by the marketplace and by ad agencies. And I'm not saying that they're the root of all evil, but we've sort of allowed it to happen. I mean, do you remember? This is a very easy straw man to burn, but I mean, it's like, you remember the Sensation show that exhibited all the YBAs at the Royal Academy, and then trooped them around the world. God, when was that? Early 2000s. And it was everywhere, and it was Saatchi's big collection. After the run of all that, he promptly deacquisitioned most of it, put it into auction, and declared it dead. And then he started collecting painting.
Yeah.
Again, it feeds back into this idea of commerce. Again, the sad fact is, and I'm talking around in circles a bit, but as an artist, we all need to make a living. We're all trying to make a living, because we're desperate to make the next painting or the next whatever it might be.
Of course, I think that's the thing. Is that you're not creating art because you want to be rich or famous. You're creating because you want to create the next piece. You want to have these better, bigger ideas, and you need money for that. And I think I actually had this conversation with someone the other day when I did an interview, and I think it's such a shame that there aren't more, kind of grants or more accessibility to money for artists and projects. What would people be able to do if they had the money to do it? It's such a shame that it's only a select few people have the opportunity to ever really fully, realize the potential of their work.
Yeah, but I think also it's a question of defining potential. Is good work, is interesting work necessarily large, flashy, and expensive? No. Sometimes it's a little bit like the idea of virtuosity is better used in the service of another. It's a little, it's like having say extraordinary guitar players, making their own album and nobody wants to listen to it because it's a lot of notes. If they're put in service of somebody else's song, sometimes that can be a better blend. I think, if I'm very, very reluctant to use the word true artist, but I can't really avoid it in this case. If somebody that needs to is going to create regardless, can be given a pack of Crayola crayons or a single pencil and a piece of paper, and they will have the route. Maybe not all the means, but certainly the route to begin satisfying or scratching that itch. If one becomes dependent on large amounts of money to even begin to make one's own work, it's a very rapid road to suddenly not being able to make anything at all. Yeah. Because you become dependent on somebody else funding it. And at some point, you're not going to be flavor of the month.
That's true.
And therefore, the money's going to dry up, and so is your work.
That's very true. And actually, talking about work and your work, so if nobody saw your work, would you still create it?
Oh, of course. And I don't say that flippantly. If I think about the span of my creative life, beginning at, age 14 or whatever, and reaching through to me being 48 now, there have been times of abundance and times of famine. My maths is terrible, so whatever the span is between then and now, I'm still doing it. And before I had a gallery, before I was selling anything, I was still making stuff. I think it's about the useful application of obsession. I think I heard it described once, and I'm not sure who said this, but you make art because when the pain of not making exceeds the pain of making, and I think there's something in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think art is a very emotive discipline. I think both for obviously the viewer, but also for the artists themselves, because you're giving a bit of yourself every time you paint or every time you create something. It's part of your story.
Yeah, it's why the trivialization of it becomes annoying.
Oh yeah, I imagine it can rub people the wrong way, because it's like you're putting time and effort into it, and you're putting actual time and actual effort into it, and you look to your left and you see somebody who created something in like 10 minutes, and it's being going viral and being shared all around the world, and you're just a bit like, damn, I've spent time doing this. There's certain artists that I see whose work I like, but then I'm just like, that's just so much better. And it just seems like, I mean, I guess it's the way it is, but it just seems like a bit of a shame that there is no kind of, I guess, gateway, really.
Aaron, it's not a meritocracy,
I
and
don't know.
therein lies the problem.
Yeah.
You know, it's a contradiction in some ways to everything we've been talking about, because it's not merit driven.
Yeah.
The wind blows, you know, and it changes direction, and
Yeah.
it's why, in a roundabout way of answering that last question, you have to just continue making the work regardless of.
Yeah, actually, that's a really interesting consideration, because I was actually listening to a podcast earlier with an artist called Alyssa Monks. I don't know if you know her work.
Yeah.
And she was saying about, because I was talking to her about like, oh, so the people interviewing her were like, oh, you're really successful, you know, was it being like having success, you know, so early on in your career? And she was like, I don't care about it. I care about creating.
Yeah.
For me, it's about the creating the work. And I hear a lot of people say that, and I've actually realized that's actually really true. It's the money side of it is, yes, of course, it's, you know, it's important, you need to survive, but it's the need to create that drives you more than anything else.
Yeah.
Do you find that's the same for you?
Absolutely. I'm going to assume that the podcast you were listening to was the Art Grind podcast.
It was indeed.
Yeah,
Yes.
I heard that one. Yeah.
Oh, even better.
I've heard Alyssa Monks interviewed a couple of times, and you know, I mean, I love her work, and it seems to come from that same root. You know, it's necessity. Necessity has driven invention, and she has gently shifted the technical narrative of her work to follow her desire. So yeah, I think she's. I can understand why she's such a good teacher and is inspirational to people.
Absolutely, it was a great podcast. It was a great episode, and I got quite a lot out of listening to it, which is interesting. That's good. But one thing I wanted to ask you that I didn't ask you last time is about photography. And do you see photography as an art form?
Absolutely.
Because oh, sorry, I was going to, because obviously there is, you know, quite a debate about it, I guess. And then obviously the last, you know, 50 years or so, it's become more and more progressively art driven and kind of based in the arts as opposed to being separated from it. So I just wanted to know what your opinion was. I didn't ask you, and I thought about after, I thought I should have asked you. So,
well, I don't know. I look at a lot of photography. I mean, I'm not massively informed about it. I must admit, I have a tendency to gravitate back towards the photographers I like, without necessarily spreading my taste wings.
yeah.
But I remember first seeing the photographs of Sally Mann,
Yes.
particularly the what's it, the True South or Deep South images, the ones that are kind of collodion plates.
Yes.
And you know, there's in the nicest possible sense, they have a very painterly feel. You know, they feel like a handmade description of time, and you know, I think that idea is at the core of the kind of photography that interests me. You know, we talked last time about the Hiroshi Sugimoto theaters, and the idea of holding time in a single image, and you know, it being a metaphor for existence. I mean, photography is a fascinating one, particularly now, because it's the iPhone has made a photographer out of everyone. Has it made a good photographer out of everyone? Of course not. But it's driven. You know, it's given a satisfying tool into everyone's hands. I think that, you know, again, it's a medium that suffers from the from the same series of problems that we were talking about a couple of minutes ago.
It does very much. I think even more so. I think in a way,
because
I think photography even more so than art suffers from problems with what's good photography, and also the problems of just being overloaded. Because with art, yes, of course, there's a lot of artists, but you take the time to create an image. With photography, someone can just literally just upload their SD card, and then it'd be like there.
It's a softer threshold, isn't it?
Yes, that's a great way to put it, actually.
Of discernment. I think it's impossible not to come back to the same idea over and over and over again. That at some point we do stray into Emperor's New Clothes territory, and I think that there's an inevitability about that. The question is where, where and when, and I suspect that's probably personal to all of us.
So, what do you think that photography can do better than art?
Than painting?
Yes.
Well, I guess what it does is its possibility for freezing a moment with clarity is obviously something that painting cannot do by definition. We can have a damn good go at it, but it's still going to take us a long time. And the vagaries of emotion day to day, it's like this, we're all operating on our own emotional landscape. Whereas a camera it's inherently dispassionate. Yes, it is a question of which direction you point it. And if you look at an artist like Gregory Crewdson, who orchestrates single images that look like film sets, they do something slightly different. I think the thing is that it's a bit like a Venn diagram. Is it a Venn diagram with the interlocking circles? I never know which one's which. But yeah, it's one of those where photography is in one circle and painting is in another, and there is an overlap. It's a question of how big that overlap is, and I think it depends on the painting, and it depends on the desire behind the photograph. I think also they're two different worlds. Photography stands very, very definitively in the world of everyday experience. Painting occupies a world of its own. I guess I would say that being a painter, and there's no hierarchy in that. But they operate on different rules. The experience of them is different. It's a little bit like realist painters. One of the can be seen as an insult when you say, "Oh, that looks just like a photograph." Yeah. No, photographs do something different. Paintings occupy a different space.
Right. Actually, going back to just randomly going back to Interview with the Little Monks, that's what she said. Actually, she said that when somebody said her painting was like a photograph, she was really annoyed by that because it's not meant to be a photograph; it's meant to be a painting. So that's really I think that's also really interesting. The idea of how real is too real.
It's also about how the temperature of an experience, the emotional temperature of an experience. Is there a difference between going to? I'm going to use the museum again as a stage set to play this little drama out. Is there a difference between standing in front of a famous painting, doesn't matter which one it is, and looking at it with your eyes, or holding a camera up to it and looking at the screen that's therefore looking at the painting? Are we reducing art to proof?
Well, yeah, for me, I don't know if that's I'm assuming that was a rhetorical question, but for me, there is a difference, because looking at something through a screen is not the same as looking at it in real life. We may think it is, and we may have been led to believe it is, but it's not, because the way you experience something on a screen, a screen is pixels, the pixels are glass. A painting is painting and texture. and brushstrokes.
But this feeds back around to the difference between painting and photography. Photography is inevitably a facsimile of experience,
Yes.
and painting is an experience. It's a little bit like the difference that they say between religion and spirituality. Religion is trusting in somebody else's experience, and spirituality is notionally having your own experience.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that. So you paint every day?
Yeah.
So how do you stay motivated to keep creating work, and how do you make sure that you're not just repeating yourself?
Two words leap automatically to mind, and it's grit and rigor. It's a balancing act. I paint most days. There are bound to be some days in the year that it doesn't happen, but
of course,
it is my intention to continue the dialogue with the process. Or process is the wrong word, practice. And that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's no longer about, is that phrase they use, that it's 10% inspiration, 90% perspiration.
Yes.
There's a lot of that. It ceases to be about, I'm feeling so inspired today and I must go and create. No, it's more about actually you turn up.
Yeah, you do it. You just get on with it.
Yeah, you do. And the more time goes by, the harder it gets, because your desire to make something better increases.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that's actually a really good piece of advice for people, because I think it's easy to forget that art is a lifetime practice. It's not just okay, you'll do it for a couple of years and it'll be good. It's like, there's no guarantee. Like there's no guarantee in 20 years time that you're going to be in any different position than you are now. It just means you might have, an attic full of work.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people should be a bit more conscious of, that, not just to not worry so much about being caught up in whether things are good necessarily, but more in creating the work and getting on with it. And, as you said, showing up, just doing it.
I think the work is its own reward. And it has to be. I would rather, I'm in the lucky position where, I'm able to sell my work. But, I've also been in the position of not selling my work and still having to feed the dog. And in the non-literal sense, and in the literal sense, figuring out how to keep going, how to keep doing it. That's where the grit comes in. You have to be bloody minded enough to keep going.
Absolutely, because I think it's not an easy path as it may seem like it initially is, or when you start out, maybe it's not as necessarily fun-filled or as
it's not something you do to relax.
Absolutely not. That's true. That's very true. But so in terms of repetition of ideas and kind of expanding your work and evolving yourself as an artist, like how often do you think about that, and how often do you look at your past work and be like, compare yourself to then to now? Is that something you do?
Inevitably. Weirdly, a painting that I made in 2008 sold today.
Oh wow!
It's a few years old and it's going out into the world finally. And that's an interesting feeling. At that point, I believed it to be the pinnacle of what I could do at that point. Yeah. Otherwise, I wouldn't have finished it. When I look at it now, it's a painting I'm still happy to be represented by. I had the weird experience a couple of years ago where I was working as an art technician for a short period to keep feeding that dog. And I was working with somebody from the government art collection in Britain, and knowing that they owned a painting of mine, And so, you know, I got talking to this lady, and I said, do you happen to know where the painting is? You know, has it had its own life? Has it been shown anywhere? And she said, well, yeah, actually, at the moment, let me just look it up. Oh, it's in Beijing. You know, it's been shown here, there. You know, and I was like, okay. So when you release something into the world, it takes on its own life, and you have no control over it. But the idea of forward movement, I would prefer to be gradual and led by the work, rather than an artificial sense of, right, must change. You know, right. You know, let's keep things rolling very, very quickly. And it's a little bit linked to striving for originality.
That was one of my next questions.
What's the question?
The question is about originality. Like, how important is originality to you in your work, and also just in society?
I think striving to be original, it can be a little bit of it's a bit like a ghost that's held before us, you know, that only when you're original will you be successful. You know, I don't know, if we look back to the Renaissance, pre-Renaissance, in order to get work, there were a variety of, but comparatively small variety of themes that were commissioned. You know, your commissions came from the church or very wealthy families. So the number of things that you could do was subsequently much, much smaller. You know, the idea of the terror of the blank canvas possibly wasn't quite such an issue. But in that, say, you know, Michelangelo paints an Assumption, Titian paints an Assumption, Caravaggio paints an Assumption. The theme is the same, but those three paintings are extremely different. Same characters, still very, very different. The fact of making anything with any kind of personal reflection and integrity makes it unique by definition. It could only exist or be made within those number of hours by you then. The pursuit of something that has never been seen before, with all the whistles and bells on it, you know, it leaves us all scratching our heads, aching to be original. I remember, you know, my first year at university, the leader of the course, who shall remain nameless, always used the word interesting. You know, but that's interesting. So what you'd have is what we had, what were 30 odd people desperate to be interesting, and interesting was synonymous with unique. I mean, Christ, I'm a landscape painter. I make paintings of landscapes. How unique is that in the grand scheme of history? Not even remotely. Does anybody?
It's how you do it.
Yeah, well, that's the point. You know, does anybody make them quite like me? Well, they couldn't.
No, that's true.
Because nobody else is me. It's like, you know, what's that wonderful Oscar Wilde quote? Always be yourself, because everybody else is already taken.
Would you say that's the same for photography as well, though? Or would you say photography has a different set of rules when it comes to originality?
Oh, that's a good one. It depends on the method. I think maybe even more so. I think every image has to be unique, because it could only have been taken at that time, in that place, by that person.
That's true.
Everybody else was somewhere else with a different camera. Also, one thing you realize, or one thing I've realized in the time that I've taught, you know, or going to see degree shows, for art school degree shows, and seeing them sort of year after year. You go back in 10 years' time and you see the same ideas coming through, because there are only a certain number of things that truly excite us.
That's true. That's kind of a good way to consider. You're right. There are some central themes that people seem to be drawn to, but they explore them in very different ways and very different tangents and very different kind of.
I mean, what do we care about? There aren't that many things, but the things that we care about, we want to explain to ourselves.
That's a good way of putting it. I like that.
So I'm being terribly pushy today.
No, it's great. So how do you define yourself as an artist without putting yourself into a box?
Well, I have a tendency to call myself a painter, considering the mess we've got ourselves into with the word artist. But then, of course, you can trip over yourself by saying, "Oh, do you paint houses?"
Yeah, that's true. Landscape is a broad term.
I make paintings, and in the broad scheme of things, yes, I'm an artist. I think over time it becomes less and less important. Again, it becomes about showing up.
That's cool. So
yes and no on the first part. I enjoy it to a certain extent. I think, like everybody else, it's a terrible temptation. There's a reason its algorithms are based on Vegas slot machines. It keeps us coming back. And I think, the very human side of it, which weirdly isn't the major side of it, I really enjoy. I find Instagram is really the only one I devote any serious time to. I really enjoy it because it introduces me to art and artists that I might not have come into contact with, or I wouldn't have come into contact with. And that's a pleasure, and that inevitably feeds back into the work, because you're seeing things done in different ways. I remember coming into contact with the paintings of Nicolas Lamori.
yes.
I'd have never come into contact with those outside of social media, possibly not. And the deconstruction of the picture plane, the surfaces, inevitably, by seeing them, they have a kind of they burrow into your subconscious somehow. Everything you see, so I that has had an effect on me. There's a lot I don't like about it, if I'm honest, and it's mostly it's faceless. It becomes the reverse of the thing that we actually think it is. It stops us being social and turns us inwards. It turns the gaze back to the screen again, and it's a little bit like back before the days of social media, people actually went out places and looked at each other, and but there was always in certain, I don't know, bars or pubs, there would be a TV in the corner, either playing or on silent, with whatever playing on it, and the number of people that are staring up at the screen, while sitting with their partner or the people that they're with, because it's a bit like it's this glowing ball of excitement that's forever changing, that we're all drawn to, and the phone is a mini version of that we carry around in our pockets. It doesn't generate memory, it becomes like a facsimile of experience rather than the experience itself. And as time's gone on, my interest in it has waned.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
But I'm not going to be all kind of I'm not going to kind of pontificate about it and say, oh, it's it's the root of all evil, because of course it isn't. But I think it needs. We have to be careful how slavish we are to it.
Yeah.
Because it can convince us that the world is a very particular way, and the obvious thought behind that is the edited highlights aspect of a life.
Absolutely.
We don't see the failures, we only see the successes. And talking about listening to podcasts, I was listening to an interview with Mitch Griffiths, and he said he sometimes has a hit rate of about 45%. So in the studio, there's inevitably going to be 55% of the work that doesn't work, or didn't make the grade for some reason. We don't, I mean, his social media account is quite open, so he tends to share a lot. But the average person isn't going to be showing that 55%. They're not going to be. We don't see all the cock-ups, that we all inevitably have.
Right, so do you share yours?
It's
not going right.
Yeah, I don't want to be all kind of holier than thou, but I do like to show the work in process.
Absolutely.
Sometimes at its ugly stages, which every painting seems to go through one. And I don't know. I like that feeling of this is what the work is. And sometimes that's not pretty. But I'm not going to try and pretend it is, just for the sake of amusing.
See, I think that's a really good point, though, because I think it's easy to forget that we are all nowadays very much guided by the algorithm. By something that we'll never have control of, that we can't possibly guess, and and try to. You have all these videos of how to beat Instagram's algorithm, and it's like, just create the work and then go from there, and then see what happens. Because at the end of the day, word of mouth is the biggest marketing tool you can have, and if your work is that good, people are going to share it, whether no matter if they see it now or in 5 years' time. And the great thing about art and creating things is that creating things are timeless. Like a piece of art is timeless. I think we have a very I think nowadays things are very instant. Everything's very now. So if you create a piece of work today, tomorrow you're going to be okay, that's old. But I think a lot of people forget that what you're creating, and you're the perfect example of your painting that sold from 2008. It's like, just because you create something back then doesn't mean that it's not so relevant now. And I think I personally, I have a tendency to forget that whatever I create today, in 20 years' time, it's still going to be as viable as it is today.
It's worth, and this can be absolutely crippling, but it is worth keeping at the back of your mind. What am I contributing? Where do I place myself? Am I hate this word, but am I authentically being myself when I'm making this work? Am I doing the best I possibly can? And if the answer to any of that is no, then do better. Try harder. What was it? That's that other one that we learn to fail better.
Yeah. People shouldn't worry about failing. I think they should worry about not trying.
Well, God, our lives are perilously short. They just are. And if we're overly concerned about what people think of us and what people think of the work, and which is the curse of social media, people can be taken, ruined psychologically by stray words, and that's not fair on anybody. One of the one of the best things I was ever told at art school, was when I was on my foundation course, and we just started the painting module, and the head of the painting department, he sat us all down and he said, painting is very, very difficult, because you hang your heart on the wall and people just walk past. And nothing has proven truer. You become kind of used to it and immune to the idea that, yet you have an exhibition and you stand there in front of it and you hope people are going to love it. And generally they don't. It's just a sad fact, because you can't appeal to everybody. And social media is a little bit like trying to.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it gives you the false impression that everybody cares, and when they really don't. I think that's why, it's why the words like and follow, they're quite loose terms.
Well, because there's no fuck you button.
That's true. That's very true.
There's no dislike button. It's skewed. That's probably a good question to ask you now, or just generally, is like, so what kind of feedback do you prefer as an artist on via social media? Like, are people telling you that they love your work? Is that helpful to you? Or do you prefer any other kind of feedback? Oh my God, everybody loves a dopamine hit of a like. Everybody loves that feeling of my work has spoken to somebody sufficiently where they've just taken the emotional leap to say this affected me. Do I want to hear, no, your work is awful, don't show it anymore? Of course not. What kind of masochist would I be? I think criticism that is uncourted it is a product of self-importance. If I'm asking for a critique, then I'm asking for a critique. If I'm not asking for one, yeah.
But what makes somebody worthy of critiquing your work, though?
Well, everybody's worthy of it, but am I necessarily going to invite it? That's a different matter.
So I guess, who do you know how to listen to? But do you have certain people that you would ask for critiques?
I think if I'm struggling with something in the work, then absolutely, there are people whose opinions that I value. I don't make work in a vacuum.
Of course.
Contrary to everything that we've said about social media, I've still opened an Instagram account. It's still running. So yes, of course, I'm interested. And in those dark moments in the night when you can't sleep, of course it matters. Of course it matters to you what people think of the work. I've been quite lucky. People are generally kind. Instagram seems to be so far for me a very kind place, and people have been complimentary generally, which is lovely. It's possibly why I've steered clear of Twitter.
Do you think social media gives a false hope to potentially new artists, in terms of they might just look at it and be like, oh, let's just put our work online and people will like it, it will sell?
Yes and no. I mean, it's only a false hope if it doesn't work. And for a percentage of people, it might. I don't think anybody's quite figured out what it all means. The social media phenomena. We have it in our hands to try and understand, but human interaction is infinitely complex. It's a delicate dance that we haven't been taught the steps to. And just because we reduce it to the size of a screen and X number of characters, it doesn't make it any less intricate. So I think we have a responsibility that is unaired sometimes. I think one of the problems with the digital world is that it gives people the opportunity to say both exactly what they think in an unedited way, but also it gives them the opportunity to be anonymously mean.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's very true.
Without repercussions.
That's true.
And that can't be a good thing.
No, it's not. It's definitely not. I mean, we've seen that time and time again. It's definitely not. But in terms of social media, though, so how do you balance creating art and, creating something physical with also being online and trying to engage with the people that do follow you in your work?
I'm quite bad at answering comments. I tend to do it in a bit of a rash. I won't do it when they come in because generally I'm doing something else. And these days, particularly, I kind of refuse to be a slave to it. To the time of it. But I do value it. I value the kindness of strangers. And I think in some ways that for me is the crux of my experience with social media. I guess like everybody, I use my phone for music and podcasts and audiobooks and all the rest of it. So the thing is there. But I try and keep the cover closed so that if I posted something, that's that.
Yes, no, I agree. I have the habit of, as soon as I post something, I'll turn my data off and just leave it. And I'll come back to it later on that day at some other point. But I think that's a good point. I think because we use our phones for everything else as well now, it's such a lure. Like I have a computer and I have a phone. So if I'm not on my phone, if I'm not on Instagram, come on my computer, even like now, like I like doing this because I'm talking to you and I'm not on my phone. Like it's nice. It's nice to take that break. I think that's a great thing to do. But I also think the digital world has really kind of taken over the way we view the world itself. And I think that's it's a bit of a shame, I think, personally. I just think it's a distraction, if anything else.
Yeah, I think I have to repeat myself. I think it's a facsimile of an experience rather than an actual experience. I mean, it's an experience of somebody else having an experience.
That's true. And do you actually think that because we see other people experiencing their experiences, we base our assumptions of what we can have based on their lives?
But I think we model, or we're starting to model the things that I have nothing to base this on at all, and it is just a guess and an observation. But I think we are in a weird position where we are modeling morality or our ethical ideas about the world on content that has been created to amuse us, and that's a very slippery slope. Yeah, I'm again, I go back to this idea that we're creating a world that we're not entirely evolved to live in.
That's an interesting consideration, actually.
And it's only getting quicker.
That's true. That's very true. It makes you wonder what's next. Probably virtual reality, but.
Well, I think as we said last time, have we reached a point where the devices that we have, we no longer have to think about anything better? Have we reached the generation that can no longer imagine an iPad or its equivalent?
So you mentioned that you like the work of Alyssa Monks and Nicholas Amore, and they're both figurative artists, yet you're a landscape painter. So it kind of actually made me really curious. So how much figurative work do you look at? And do you think that looking at figurative work can somehow inform the landscapes that you create? Well,
I think I possibly term it slightly differently. I think that we are, for want of a better term, all three of us are representational painters. Yes. We're all painting objects from the real world, be they human or environmental. Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I'm very fond of looking at figurative painting, and certainly the kind of fringes of it. And actually, I don't look at a great deal of landscape painting. And I think that's probably a good thing, because I don't want to be caught within this kind of closed manifold, where the notions around landscape are the only thing that's feeding back in. I think that looking at contemporary, or I say contemporary painting in general, it's like I'm not going to go to a museum and only look at the Corros or the Constables.
No, that's true.
The majority of work that we see is concerned with our experience of each other and the world, be it internal or external.
That's true. And the only reason I say it is because the two artists you said you like, figurative wise, it's like a very certain style of painting where it's real, but it's not. It's representation is probably a good way to put it, actually, because it's it's just a very certain style, and it's a style I very, very much like. It's the kind of figurative work I really like. So I've got a load of suggestions for you then, if you like that kind of stuff.
Looking at somebody like Justin Mortimer, or Phil Hale,
absolutely,
or Adrian Genny, where their work, and again with Alyssa Monks, the work is straddling the physicality of paint and the illusion of object. Particularly in with somebody like Phil Hale, the work is very much about real things, but they're not constructed in the way that tells us the full story of it. And they're also a lot of the artists that we're talking about, with the possible exception of Alyssa Monks, they're dealing with almost like the netherworld of our emotional experience. They're not entirely comfortable.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely not. And I think that's what makes them really fascinating. Like it's like it taps into some kind of other kind of conscious. I think,
Again, it goes into this idea of the painted world. It's a place of infinite amoral variety. It's a great consolation in some ways to know that we're all making very different work, but we're all more or less the same. We're all driven by the same set of desires that end up revolving around paint.
Is there any kind of sacrifice or compromise you have to make to be an artist?
Oh God, yeah. Security, is one of them. My parents' generation, the idea of the job for life was still around.
Absolutely.
But these days, not so much. That idea seems to have fallen by the wayside. And as an artist, you actually do have a job for life. It may not pay you anything sometimes, but it stays with you. You don't retire. I think it's a balancing act. You have to balance it if you want to live a full life. If you want meaningful relationships and friendships and experiences of the world, you have to balance out your time in the studio with the necessity of something else. And over the years, that balance, I haven't always got that right. But at the same time, I'm not sure I'd have necessarily done that any differently. I think it's taken me getting a little bit older to find a better balance. Actually, just the constraints of the body, frankly. if you paint for 16 hours a day, when you're 25, you can deal with it. You know, you have another cup of coffee and everything's fine. If you do it when you're in your late 40s, you know, your back is going to complain or your shoulders are going to hurt, and you know, you have to kind of be more aware.
That's true.
Of the physical limitations of who you are, but also realize that the time spent not doing it can be almost as valuable as the time spent doing it, because you have to push things back into the work. You know, it's like your emotional landscape will become rather monotonous if you're not bringing new things into that landscape.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And it's funny that you should say that, because you say you create, like, you know, at least most days. So that's really interesting to hear you say that. And I think that's a good point. I think sometimes we forget that people do need to just take a break and need to stop doing things and to think things over. Sometimes you have to think things through first rather than just create.
We all have other interests. We all have other things that we can do. You know, I think one of the you know, is that the great problems of life really is that we're desperately searching for meaning, and making art is a self-imposed identity crisis. You know, where the search for meaning is at its core, and that can take over almost everything else.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you, again, you know, if you're not feeding stuff back in, you know, if you cease reading, you know, if you no longer watch films, if you don't go out for a walk, if you don't talk to other people, it's a dry well.
Absolutely. You need the experience to kind of understand yourself, and that will manifest in your work, because obviously your work is in very many ways ultimately about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, there was this wonderful, I can't remember the artist said this, when asked about his work, he said, all the men in my paintings are me, all the women in the paintings are me, all the landscapes in my paintings are me. You know, it all feeds back round, because it's all from one root.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's very true. I think that, like you were saying earlier, like, you creating the work will make it unique because you're the one creating it at that moment in time, in that headspace with this, you know, particular time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a good point. It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. It makes sense to me, at least.
That's good.
So, success. So what does it mean to be a successful artist? And has your idea of success changed since you first started doing art?
Answering it back to front, yes. Yeah, very much so. I think that the older I get, the more my dependency on the external trappings of success has diminished. Nowadays, as romantic as it sounds, it really is about the work. You know, the work is its own barometer of success. You know, even though that success, that feeling of, yes, I've done something useful, is very short-lived, and automatically leads on to the desire to make something better. There's the success is in that. The punctuation marks along that stream are sales. You know, I need to continue to make work. I need to be able to afford to continue to make work and live.
Of course.
And they are necessarily a some kind of measure of success, because they do mean that somebody liked it enough to want to live with it. For, you know, finances aside. You know, when I hate saying like old father time, but when I was younger, you know, back in the olden days, you know, I grew into an art into the London art world. Worked for a gallery. Was very aware of the mechanics of success, and you know, I saw books being made about artists, and somebody having an exhibition here, and always having an exhibition in New York, and always, and you know, it's the bubble of it is very bright and shiny and beautiful and buoyant, and you desperately want to be picked up by it. And if one is lucky, one brushes up against it. You know, and you know, I've had, like everybody, my successes and failures. You know, I remember having an exhibition that started the day one of the Gulf Wars was announced.
Oh.
And people came, nobody bought a thing. You know, nobody bought anything for 6 months because everybody's attention was elsewhere. You know, it's the first thing people are going to stop buying is luxury items. So success is rather dependent on, if you measure success by people's reaction to the work, you will never take into account everything else that's happening in their lives. So it has to go full circle and come back to yourself again, you know, which sounds incredibly navel-gazing. But, you know, you can only please yourself with it. I've got a responsibility to myself to make the best work I can while I'm able to make work. And my facility to continue to challenge myself is the kind of cornerstone of the keystone of being able to be successful, I think.
Hey, it's a learning curve. It's a lifetime learning curve, isn't it, really?
It is.
Because, like, you know, I think the word success is a very, you know, very broad term. And, you know, what you think success is not what the next person thinks it is. So, you know, the day, like, being successful is just making money, making a living off art. And then other people being successful is, you know, making a certain threshold of money a year or something. You know, I think success is very different, which is why I like asking people the question.
Well, it's relative, isn't it?
Yeah, very relative. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the best way to put it. It's relative. It's a good question to ask people just because everyone has a very different answer, which is nice. So you sell work, which is obviously a great thing. But that makes me curious as to, so who is your audience, or do you have like an audience in mind when you create work, because you're already selling work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I don't create work with the audience in mind. You know, the audience, because the audience is variable. You know, for each painting, you only need one person to buy it.
Wow,
you know, beyond its digital form, and you never know who that person is going to be and why they react to the work. You know, it's the great unknowable. So trying to make work for that particular person is impossible. You know, the best we can really hope for is just to follow the obsession, and keep making, in the blind hope that somebody's going to get it, and then we'll spend the money and actually get it. That said, you know, it's impossible not to consider a target audience. You know, people that are interested in geometric abstraction aren't going to be interested in my work. You know, it's just, so I'm not going to pitch it at them. You know, people that are interested in portraiture aren't going to be so interested in my work, so it's not going to be pitched to them. You know, the field limits with every decision you take, and in the end it narrows down to a field of one.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's pretty interesting, because as somebody who looks at a lot of art all the time, which is probably not a good thing now, when I think about it lately, is like, it's hard for me to define what I like for art, because I look at so much and I like so much.
But what is it that you're actually looking for? What is it that it's doing for you?
See, I don't actually know, which sounds strange. That probably because somebody asked me the other day how I choose artists to feature. Because obviously, you know, I contact a lot of people, but not every day I contact gets back to me, and or there's plenty of, you know, millions of other people I don't contact. And particularly with these interviews, like it's weird. I'm quite selective about who I've asked to interview and who I've not, because, you know, I can interview everybody and anybody, and part of me would love to do that, but at the same time, it's like there's always something I want to ask the artist about their work, is why I've asked them to interview them. I don't just randomly ask people for the sake of it, because I mean I could, but I just don't. I want to create more work for myself. It's already enough work. So do you ever feel like posting your work online lessens its impact?
No. There's a pithy answer for you. No. I think if that's the if that's the only platform in which it can be seen, and will only ever be seen that way, reducing, for the sake of argument, I don't know, a 6 by 4 foot painting down to 2¼ inches, it inevitably is going to change and diminish its impact. I think what can lessen or almost cheapen the work is anything that seeks to devalue it. It's like if people use the work, recently I had a painting used as the cover for an album, and the one thing I stipulated was that yes, it's not a square painting, so you're going to crop it, but feel free to crop it, but don't change the color.
Yeah,
so it maintains the integrity of my initial intention. I think part of living in the modern world is that if you make anything, it's going to get out there, and if you Google yourself, there's going to be a flood of it, half of which you've forgotten you ever did, and you have no control over it. It's going to be disseminated as people wish, and all you can hope to do is make sure that the images you take of it that you share are as good as they can be, because then at least they represent it fairly.
Yeah, because obviously your work is a representation of you. Particularly because it carries your name as well. It's not you're not creating it under like an alias or anything. It's your name. So people Google you and your name and your image. It's your work. That's yeah. I think that's a really good question, or at least a good discussion about self-representation through work in terms of like. And the best way to ask you, I guess, would be like, what do you think your work says about you?
Well, it's a bit like, are we our work? Yes and no. Is it all self-portraiture? Yes, to a larger extent it is. But at some point we have to separate the art from the artist. It's a little bit like the argument. Let's take an artist like Picasso is the obvious one, because he's within living memory. By all accounts, he wasn't a particularly pleasant person to be around. Do we devalue his work because of his character? No, I'm sure some people do, but that's generally just a question of moral panic. Going back a long way. Have you ever, speaking about podcasts, have you listened to Art Holes?
No, I haven't. No.
That's a fascinating one. It's somebody who describes himself as having no business running an art history podcast. Does a real deep dive into the story of an artist, and he looked at Caravaggio, and Caravaggio was an absolute stinker, in the historical record, an absolute shambles of a person, but arguably created some of the highest achievements of painting. Do we paint over them simply because he was a bit of a stinker? No, of course we don't. Are we? Is our work a product of us and our character? Yes. Does it then take it on its own life and have its own agency? Absolutely.
That's a good point, though, actually, in terms of character and the art. And I think that a lot of people nowadays find it hard to separate the art from the artist.
Because going back a little further in the conversation, because we have this branding, where the artist's personality is just as important or more important than the work. So in that case, how can you separate them out? When we think about the idea of a pickled shark, we think Damien Hirst. Or Balloon Dog, we think about Jeff Koons, because the personality or the figurehead or the name is just as important, or more important than the integrity of the actual work.
That's true.
Yeah, unavoidable.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, so this is a question I did ask you last time. I'm going to re-ask you again. And this is the question from the painter Felicity Beaumont. And it was, at what point did you feel comfortable to call yourself an artist?
at what point did I feel comfortable calling myself an artist? I think I slid gently into the term. In some ways, it's like a process of elimination. You find yourself painting. It becomes something that's important to you, and you want to continue doing it, and it's the only thing that provides actual meaning. Therefore, the term is sort of bestowed, irrespective of choice. I think it's not a lifestyle, so that the term becomes less relevant. It's a little bit like anything vocational. It stops being a choice. Did I have a choice to do this? I mean, I could have stuck a spanner in my own works and say, no, I'm going to put the brushes away and stuff that. I'm going to do something else. But then would I have had a happy life? Would I have always been thinking there was something in that art thing? I think it's something that I've always been, will always be, and it's for people, it's for everybody else to figure out what that means. I'm stuck with it now.
You resigned to the fate. Like, oh, okay. No, that's good though. That's a good attitude to have though, because it's not like you're like, oh, I need to do this, I have to. But see, I like that. I think it's really nice to talk to you, because you seem to be in a very good position where you're grateful for what you have, but you're also very aware that in the grand scheme of life, it's not, it's not that important, because that sounds like I'm trivializing its importance. But I think, you're in that good space where you're grateful for what you've got, but you're also very conscious of how much hard work you put into it, because it hasn't came overnight.
I think that the kind of the most important thing that I am reminded of is that art and painting has no inherent meaning. The object itself has no inherent meaning beyond that which we bestow upon it. As Picasso said, it's they are lies through which the truth is revealed.
I like that.
And that is the sum, not sum total, but it's a major factor in the making of paintings. Every mark, as a representational painter, that I make is an abstraction. It's not the thing itself. It's a representation or a facsimile of the thing that I'm trying to understand. And eventually I end up with an object that looks like something, hopefully. But every one of those brushstrokes has no inherent meaning. It's like a sum total. And a life in art is, it's a good metaphor for a life in art. It has no inherent meaning beyond that which you bestow upon it. Being a painter is personally as meaningful a pursuit as I can imagine. It seems to me at this point that that's kind of what life is for. And I sincerely hope that I get to the end of my life thinking I made a good fist of it. I devoted myself to something that I could find meaning in, and that other people could gain pleasure from that meaning.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's great. I think it's a great attitude to have. That's a great attitude to have. Yeah. And I think, I enjoy what you're doing. Not that that means anything to anybody, but I enjoy what you're doing, and I think you do a good job. So yeah, is there anything you'd like to do with your work that you haven't already done yet?
No, yeah, I'm finding over the last 2 years, particularly, I've felt a kind of opening up of the way I look at the materials, the imagery, the possibility to apply that desire to anything, or rather any subject. I think part of being a painter is that you have this image at the back of your head that you can't really see. It's a little bit like you can sometimes catch it out of the corner of your eye, but you're permanently seeking a way to bring it to the forefront. And painting is a byproduct of that. And the image that is scratching the back of my skull at the moment is it's deeper, it's denser, it's more lustrous. The colour's more luscious. The surfaces are glassy. The paint is smoother, thicker. It's like everything is more. And so it's like it's got such a long way to go. So I still feel like I'm right at the beginning of things.
That's a great mentality to have, though, because it's like you have that joy of just doing stuff, and you're not so constrained to, oh, this is the only thing I can do, and I'm not going anywhere with it.
Well, I think it's brinkmanship all the time. You're courting failure with everything you do. If you don't change, you'll fail. If you do change, you'll fail. And along the way, you hope that you touch upon moments where that failure is a little less. It's like it's a ridiculous paradox, because we're in making art, we're seeking to answer a question that we set ourselves, but the question is always shifting, so the answer is never complete. And as it shifts, it's becoming something else all the time.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. So what's the biggest lesson you've learned so far about being an artist?
That its highs and lows are proportionally greater than experience without it. Those highs are short-lived, but they're tempting enough to continue to struggle towards. Going back to this idea of meaning again, that yes, that there is, repeating myself, that there is no inherent meaning in it, but its meaning is still weirdly clear. That society has a tendency to deify the object but vilify the creator, and that no matter what I do, it keeps calling me back.
I really like the way you articulate things. I think it's really interesting.
Thank you.
I think you're very good at articulating things. That's why I said to you last time you should be a teacher. Like, you really should. Like, you really should. I think, like, generally, I think it would be really good. I mean, obviously, if you want it, it's still cool. But I think it'd be really good for you personally. I think it'd be really good. I just like the way you talk about things, and I think it's inspiring. And I don't mean that so generically, how people always use it, but it's very inspiring. Like, I've enjoyed the conversation. It's not over yet, but I've enjoyed it so far. Are there any misconceptions about being an artist that you don't like?
Oh God, yeah. That it is, it's relaxing. Yeah, that one doesn't work. I think that the thing that really bothers me is that, particularly when you do it professionally, for want of a better word, is this idea that at some point you're going to stop doing that and get a proper career. That it's synonymous with flamboyance or frivolity, or being somehow unserious in life. The popular kind of misconception is that we're, we get up at midday and we flick paint about for a bit and then we go to a party. And of course, if being an artist was like that, nobody would get anything done. Most of the time we don't go to parties because we've got something to do. So yeah, that misconception is irritating. But I think also, that we can do this to ourselves. I think it's very easy to buy into the drama of it. That it is about the pursuit of meteoric success, and it's one of the reasons I'm deeply glad that I'm older, and I've done this for so long, because I've repeating, going back to the same point again. It's like the measure, and I'm glad that you asked it about talking about notions of success. That success isn't what we think it is, or what others necessarily would have us believe to keep striving. The one thing I really do love about this about this life in painting is the pleasure that I get when I sit down at the easel and start again. Every day I have the gift, the pleasure in life to be able to continue, to try and make something better, and to maybe share that with people.
Yeah, I like that.
So that's both negative and positive.
No, that's good. Like, that's good, and I appreciate that. I appreciate your honesty. So, how do you define the term contemporary art?
I suspect that my answer is going to be pretty similar. You can look at there are two answers wrapped up together. The first of which is is a little obvious, in that by definition, we're alive now. We're making stuff, so that makes us contemporary artists. That for me is in some ways the nicer way of looking at the term, because it places us all together. However, a few years ago, another term was floated, which might have got us off the ground in a slightly better way, and it was this idea of being post-contemporary, which definitely referred to more obvious notions of contemporary art. It sort of depends who you ask. If you ask somebody that has been annoyed or appalled or made to feel stupid in some way by a work of contemporary art that they feel like they're the only person that doesn't understand, then contemporary art is something to be ridiculed, or distrusted or feared. And honestly, I think we haven't done ourselves many favors as artists in this. Naming no names, it's so tempting, isn't it? But looking at, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'll be doing it for a lot longer, hopefully.
Absolutely.
And the number of exhibitions in the last, say, 10 years that I've seen that have meant anything to me, and not just from a taste aspect, is a vanishingly small list. If I see one more word in neon flashing on a wall, I'm going to scream. I really am. Not that there's anything wrong with neon particularly, but it's merely an example of it's almost like a thinness of aspiration. I think one of the problems with the kind of communal idea of what contemporary art is that it has become almost synonymous with the obfuscation of meaning, so that it's intentionally obtuse. It's intentionally seeks to keep us at a distance. It's almost like it's too clever for its own good.
Yeah.
I think generally, if the description of a work in the panel on the wall is more interesting than the actual visual impact of the work itself, something's gone a bit off. And I've seen way too much of that. And it's a very, very good way of alienating people, that creates an in-group and an out-group. And unfortunately, we're at the point now where the out-group is the majority of people, and the in-group is vanishingly small, but ever more self-important.
That's a really good way to put it, actually. That's a very good way to put it, actually. And it's very true as well when you think about that, the elitism that runs through art and things like that, which is something a lot of people say.
We can't, fall under the spell of, this idea that everything has to be for everybody, because it can't be.
Yeah, of course.
Otherwise, why do anything with any integrity? Why do anything that might stray outside conceptions of public taste? Things can be marginal, things can be unconcerned with moral choice. Things can be unconcerned with aesthetic choice. But I'm not a fan of the snide, or the overly ironic, or the I don't like feeling like somebody's trying to make fun of me merely by my presence in the gallery. And that has happened way too often. So, coming to actually answer that question, I think the term contemporary art is a double-edged sword. It's both a statement of fact and a thinly veiled insult.
That's actually a really good, that's actually a great answer. That's a very good answer, because it's actually a very truthful answer. Okay, so the second to last question would be, do you have any advice for artists?
Probably too much, or not enough, depending on who it was. I think it's very difficult to make kind of catch-all statements, despite the fact that that's what I've been doing for the last couple of hours. Honestly, I think it turn up. It's so obvious, if you don't turn up, if the work doesn't get done, you never see what you're capable of. Look back in time and realize that your grasp will always extend your reach. There are things that are possible that we can't imagine within the arts, but also not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. A life in art is long, hopefully. It's a long progression. And if you flit about from one half-formed idea to another and don't allow yourself the time to thoroughly research what you're doing, you'll never see what you're capable of. So turn up and get the work done.
Yeah, well, I think that's really simple but really good advice, because if you don't do the work, you're not going to have the career. Okay, so that the final question, the double barrel, is going to be, what are you currently working on, and where can people find more about you and your work?
Okay, I am currently working on in broader terms, I'm working on a body of work that is much more close to home. It's very much based around my experience of this particular landscape of Newfoundland. It is, I'm pushing the colour around in a much more deliberate and specific way. In smaller terms, I've just started a painting that is a little bit bigger, and it's extending my reach a little, and that's kind of fun. That's what I'm working on at the moment. I've got, in this pandemic inflicted world, shows aren't so abundant, and my time is my own. So I'm able to, using that lovely contemporary phrase, I'm able to drill down on, into things that mean something to me. Where you can find me, the website, Mark Thompson -artist.com. On Instagram, I relatively frequent poster, which is @Mark Thompson Artist. And that's pretty much it. And of course, through my galleries. So I have a gallery in Seattle and one in Germany, and all of those filter out of my website.
That's perfect. Well, Mark, honestly, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you so much for doing it again as well. That concludes the second and final part of my conversation with Mark Thompson. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions or comments about the conversation, please send me an email via theflyingfruitbowl@gmail.com or via social media sites such as Instagram. The Flying Free Belt audio interviews can now be found on a variety of sites, such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to support the platform, please consider subscribing on any of those and sharing this interview with friends and family. Also, if you're a creative, please get in touch for a chance to be featured or interviewed. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and until next time folks, please stay safe.